He handed me his daughter's hand through the car window like he was passing me something breakable. Then, without meaning to, he grabbed mine instead. For half a second his fingers closed around my wrist, warm and too tight, like he was holding onto a ledge. Then he realized what he'd done and let go so fast you'd think I'd burned him. "Sorry," he said, not looking at me. "Long morning." I told him it was fine. It wasn't a big deal. People touch hands all the time. But I noticed it. I noticed the way his jaw tightened right after, the way he glanced at the house across the street where his mother-in-law was watering flowers that didn't need watering, just watching us over the fence. I didn't know yet that this man, the quiet single dad who barely made eye contact with me for 6 months, was about to ask me for a favor that would unravel everything he'd spent years hiding. I didn't know that by the end of that summer, I'd understand exactly why his hands shook whenever mine got too close. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is his. Daniel Hale moved into the house next to mine on a Tuesday in March, driving a minivan that was too big for one man and one 6-year-old girl. He didn't wave when he saw me on my porch. He just nodded, the kind of nod that says leave me alone politely. I respected that, mostly. I'm not the type who forces friendship on people. But Lucy, his daughter, had other plans. She showed up at my fence 2 days later holding a dead beetle like it was treasure, asking if I wanted to see it. "Only if your dad says it's okay," I told her. Daniel appeared in the doorway a second later, wiping his hands on a dish towel, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a long time. He had this careful stillness to him, like every movement was something he'd thought through first. Dark hair he kept pushing out of his eyes. A wedding ring he still wore even though I never once saw a wife. "She talks to strangers," he said, not quite an apology. "I'm Eli. I just moved in across the street in January." "I know. I've seen you." He said it fast, like he regretted it immediately. That was the whole conversation. But something about the way he said "I've seen you" stayed with me longer than it should have. For weeks after that, our interactions were small. A wave, a borrowed extension cord, him grabbing my mail once when a package sat on my porch too long in the rain and setting it inside my screen door without knocking, like he didn't want to be seen doing something kind. I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way he'd disappear into his garage some nights and sit in his truck with the engine off, just sitting there in the dark for 20 minutes before going inside. The way he flinched, actually flinched, if another man got close to him at the mailboxes. The way he never mentioned Lucy's mother, not once, and how the neighborhood women who dropped off casseroles when he first moved in always got the door closed on them a little too quickly. Then came the favor. It was a Thursday evening in April. He knocked on my door looking like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say and forgotten half of it anyway. "I have a work thing tonight, last minute." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Lucy's sitter canceled. I know we don't really know each other, but you're the only person I trust on this street who isn't going to ask questions." I said yes before I even thought about it. That night changed something between us, though neither of us said it out loud. Lucy fell asleep on my couch during a movie about a talking dog, and Daniel came home at 11, still in a button-down shirt that looked like it had been tied around his collar all day. He stood in my doorway for a long moment just watching his daughter sleep, and something in his face cracked open, just slightly, something tired and grateful and lonely all at once. "Thank you," he said. "Really, anytime." He looked at me like he wasn't used to people meaning that. After that night, the favors kept coming. Small ones. Watch Lucy for an hour. Help him carry a bookshelf. Taste test a recipe because he didn't trust his own cooking. And slowly, without either of us naming it, we became something like friends. I learned things about him in fragments, the way you learn a language nobody teaches you directly. He was a structural engineer, methodical, precise, the kind of man who alphabetized his spice rack. He'd grown up 2 hours north in a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, raised by a father who quoted scripture more than he spoke plainly. He laughed rarely, but when he did, it transformed his whole face, and I found myself doing stupid things just to see it happen again. What I didn't learn, not for a long time, was anything about Lucy's mother. There were no photos of her in the house except one, turned slightly away on the mantel, like even the frame was trying not to look at itself. I asked Lucy once, carefully, where her mom was. In heaven, she said simply, coloring a picture of a horse. Daddy says she's watching but she can't call anymore. I didn't push further. Some doors you don't open uninvited. By June, I was spending most evenings at their kitchen table, helping Lucy with reading homework while Daniel cooked, the two of us falling into an easy rhythm that felt dangerously like a family. I noticed the way he'd glance at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, quick, searching glances that vanished the moment I turned my head. I noticed the way he remembered that I took my coffee black, that I hated cilantro, that I always sat in the chair facing the door. I noticed because I was doing the exact same thing to him. The first real crack in his walls came during a thunderstorm. Lucy had a fever, high enough that Daniel paced the living room with his phone in his hand, debating whether to call the after-hours line or just drive to the ER. I sat with her on the couch, a cool washcloth on her forehead, and told him he was allowed to breathe. I don't know how to do this alone, he said quietly, more to himself than to me. You're not alone tonight. He looked at me then, really looked, in a way that made my chest tighten. Rain hammered the windows. Lucy's fever broke around midnight, and by 1 in the morning she was asleep in her bed, and Daniel and I were sitting on his back porch in the wet dark, not talking, just existing near each other in a way that felt like the loudest silence I'd ever experienced. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Does it ever bother you? Being alone. Sometimes. You get used to it. I don't think I have. He turned his glass of water in his hands. I thought I would by now. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to ask about the ring he still wore, about the photograph turned away on the mantel, about the way he sometimes looked at me like I was a question he was afraid to answer. Instead I just said, you don't have to be. He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. August brought the school fundraiser, and with it, my first real taste of jealousy, ugly and immediate. A woman named Renee, Lucy's teacher, spent the evening laughing too loud at everything Daniel said, touching his arm, angling herself toward him in a way that made my stomach twist. Daniel was polite, distant even, but I still found myself gripping my plastic cup a little too hard, tracking every interaction from across the gymnasium like it was a threat. He found me by the punch table. Afterward, you've been quiet, he said. Just tired. He studied me for a second too long. Renee's nice. She seems it. I'm not interested in her, if that's what you're asking. I hadn't asked, but something in the way he said it, direct, almost defensive, told me he'd noticed exactly what I'd been trying to hide. That was the night I first let myself admit, quietly, privately, that I wasn't just being neighborly anymore. I was falling for a man who wore another woman's ring and flinched every time I got too close. The first real twist came from Lucy, of all people, one lazy Sunday while Daniel was mowing the lawn. My mom was really pretty, she told me, flipping through a photo album she wasn't supposed to have pulled off the shelf. She used to sing to me. Grandma says Daddy loved her so much he cried at her funeral for a whole hour. I looked at the photos with her. A young woman with a warm, knowing smile, always standing close to Daniel but never quite touching, in every single picture. Something about the distance in those photographs, consistent, deliberate, nagged at me in a way I couldn't explain. What was her name? Sarah. Lucy turned a page. She got sick when I was 4. Daddy doesn't like talking about it. I closed the album gently before Daniel came inside and found us with it. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Daniel and I sat on his porch again, a habit now, comfortable in a way that scared me a little. I didn't mention the photo album, but I did ask, carefully, about Sarah. His whole body went still. She was a good person, he said finally. Better than I deserved. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I know. He was quiet for a long moment. But I think I want to. Someday. Just not yet. I told him that was fine. I meant it. But I also felt, for the first time, the shape of a secret much larger than grief sitting between us, something neither of us had named yet but both of us could feel. September arrived, and with it, an accident that changed the temperature between us completely. We were fixing a fence panel that had come loose in a storm, both of us kneeling in the dirt, hands close, passing nails back and forth. My hand brushed his, and neither of us pulled away this time. We just stayed there, frozen, staring at our hands instead of each other, the air between us thick with something unspoken. Daniel, I said quietly. Don't, he said, but it wasn't sharp. It was almost pleading. Please don't. Don't what? He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were wet, glassy, terrified. Don't make me want something I can't have. Before I could respond, he stood up too fast, mumbled something about checking on Lucy, and disappeared inside, leaving me kneeling in the dirt with a nail in my hand and my heart slamming against my ribs. He avoided me for 4 days after that. 4 days of drawn curtains and a garage door that stayed shut, of Lucy shrugging when I asked where her dad was, of me lying awake wondering what I'd ruined. On the 5th day, his mother-in-law, Diane, showed up. I'd seen her before, always at a distance, always watching. She was polished in a way that felt like armor, sharp eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. She cornered me at the mailbox on a Tuesday morning. You spend a lot of time over there, she said, not quite a question. Daniel and I are friends. Sarah was my daughter. She said it like a warning. I watched her marry a man who I always suspected wasn't being entirely honest with her. I won't watch my granddaughter grow up in a household built on another lie. I didn't understand what she meant. Not fully. Not yet. I'm not sure what you're implying. Diane's smile thinned. I'm not implying anything, sweetheart. I'm telling you, if there's ever a reason to believe that little girl isn't in a stable, appropriate home, I have lawyers who would be very interested to hear about it. Sarah would want her daughter protected. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing at the mailbox with ice in my chest. That was the moment I understood the shape of what Daniel was so afraid of. It wasn't just grief. It was survival. I found him that evening in his garage, sitting in his truck the way he used to, engine off, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Diane talked to you, he said before I could speak. It wasn't a question. Yeah, he let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. She's been waiting for a reason since Sarah died. Custody laws in this state aren't as protective as people think, especially with grandparents who have money and lawyers and a story to sell a judge about instability. Daniel, what is she waiting for a reason for? He finally turned and looked at me, and the wall he'd built for years, brick by careful brick, cracked wide open. I'm gay, Eli. His voice broke on the word like he'd never said it out loud before, because he hadn't. I've been gay my entire life. I married Sarah because I loved her. I did. I loved her more than I've ever told anyone, but I loved her like you love your best friend, not like you're supposed to love a wife. And she knew. She knew before we got married, and she married me anyway because she loved me enough to give me a life that looked safe, that looked normal, that kept my father from disowning me and kept me from losing everything. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just let him keep going, the words spilling out of him like something that had been dammed up for a decade. She got sick 2 years ago. Fast, aggressive, and in the hospital, near the end, she made me promise her something. She made me promise that when she was gone, I wouldn't spend the rest of my life hiding from who I actually was. She said Lucy deserved a father who was happy, even if that happiness looked different than what everyone expected. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. But her mother doesn't know that conversation happened. Diane thinks I'm the reason her daughter is dead because I couldn't be a real husband to her, and she has spent 2 years looking for proof that I'm an unfit father so she can take Lucy from me. If she finds out about you, about us, about anything, she will use it. And I cannot lose my daughter, Eli. I can't. I finally understood every flinch, every closed curtain, every time he pulled away from me in public and reached for me in private. I'm not going anywhere, I told him. But I need you to understand that hiding forever isn't going to protect you either. Eventually it's going to hollow you out. I know, he whispered. I know that, but I need time. I gave him time. I told myself I would. But time has a way of running out faster than you expect. 3 weeks later, at a neighborhood barbecue, Daniel and I stood a little too close by the drink cooler, laughing at something Lucy had said, and a neighbor made an offhand comment, half joking, about how we looked like an old married couple. It was nothing. It was meant as nothing. But I watched Daniel's face go pale, watched him physically step away from me in front of everyone, watched him laugh too hard and change the subject too fast. Later that night, alone on his porch, I asked him why. Because Diane was standing right there, he said, voice tight. Because if word gets back to her that people are joking about us like that, she'll have exactly what she's been waiting for. So what? I just have to pretend I don't exist to you in public for the rest of our lives. I don't know what else to do. His voice cracked. I can't lose Lucy. I would rather lose everything else, Eli. I would rather lose you than lose her. The words landed like a physical blow. So that's it, I said quietly. You're choosing to end this before it even started. I'm not choosing anything. I'm surviving. There's a difference between surviving and giving up, Daniel. You've been surviving for years. Maybe it's time you actually lived. He didn't answer, and I walked home that night with my chest caving in, certain that whatever fragile, unnamed thing had been growing between us was already dead. For 2 weeks, we barely spoke. Lucy asked me why I didn't come over anymore, and I told her I was just busy, hating the lie the moment it left my mouth. I saw Daniel's silhouette some nights through his window, sitting alone at his kitchen table, and I wanted so badly to walk over there and demand he stop being so afraid. But I didn't. I respected the wall he'd built, even as it broke something in me to watch him hide behind it. Then, on a rainy Thursday, Lucy showed up at my door alone, soaked, holding an envelope in both hands like it was sacred. I found this in Mommy's old jewelry box, she said. It has Daddy's name on it. I think you should read it before he does. I think you'll know what to do. The envelope was addressed, in careful, looping handwriting, to Daniel. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that, but something in Lucy's face told me this was exactly what needed to happen. The letter was from Sarah. My darling Daniel, it began. If you're reading this, I've probably been gone a while, and you've probably spent that time being far too careful with your heart. I need you to stop. I married you because loving you, in whatever form that took, was the easiest, truest thing I ever did. I don't regret a single day of our life together. But I need you to know that my love for you was never meant to be a cage. Find someone who makes you feel the way I always wished someone could, fully, without fear. Let Lucy see her father happy and whole. That is the only inheritance I actually care about her receiving. Don't you dare let my mother's fear become yours. You have already survived the hardest part. Now go live. I sat on my porch step, rain still falling, and cried harder than I had in years. I walked to Daniel's house with the letter still in my hand, and Lucy trailing behind me, and I knocked on his door until he opened it, confusion and exhaustion written across his face. Read this, I said, handing him the letter. I watched him read his dead wife's handwriting, watched his hands shake, watched decades of fear and grief and guilt collapse in on themselves as he sank onto his porch steps and wept, really wept, for the first time since I'd known him. She knew, he kept saying. She knew, and she wanted this for me. She loved you enough to set you free, Daniel. Are you going to honor that, or are you going to keep living in a cage you built for a woman who already gave you permission to leave it? He looked up at me, eyes red, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was no hesitation in his face. I'm done being afraid, he said. I don't care what Diane does. I don't care what anyone in this neighborhood thinks. I've spent my whole life hiding pieces of myself to keep everyone else comfortable, and I'm not doing it anymore. I want you, Eli. I've wanted you since the day you moved in, and I told myself it wasn't allowed. He stood up, crossed the porch, and kissed me, right there, in full view of the street, in full view of Diane's house across the way, in full view of anyone who cared to look. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was clumsy and desperate and tasted like rain and relief. But it was the truest thing I'd ever felt. Diane did try, eventually, to make good on her threats. She hired a lawyer. She made calls. But Sarah's letter, entered as evidence of her wishes, combined with 2 years of Daniel's spotless, devoted parenting, was enough to end any custody challenge before it truly began. A judge took one look at the situation and saw exactly what it was, a grandmother's grief wearing the mask of concern, nothing more. Diane didn't speak to Daniel for months afterward. Eventually, slowly, she softened, mostly for Lucy's sake, and the three of them found something like peace, though it never returned to what it once was. Daniel and I took things slow after that, the way real relationships actually deserve to be taken. Dinners that turned into sleepovers. Sleepovers that turned into Lucy asking, casually, over cereal one morning, if I was going to be around forever. If your dad will have me, I told her. He will, she said, matter of fact, the way only a 7-year-old can be. He likes you the most out of anybody. A year later, we stood in that same backyard where he'd once pulled away from me in front of a barbecue crowd, except this time he wasn't pulling away. He was standing beside me, hand in mine, in front of everyone, Lucy holding both of our hands between us like she was the one anchoring the whole thing together. Diane came, eventually, to that small gathering too, standing a little apart but present, watching her granddaughter laugh in a yard full of people who loved her without condition. Daniel leaned close to me that evening, his hand steady in mine now, no flinching, no letting go. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said. "Thank you for finally letting yourself be found." Somewhere behind us, Lucy was chasing fireflies in the fading light, laughing the unguarded laugh of a child who has never once doubted she is loved. And I understood, watching her, watching him, that some love stories don't begin with fireworks. Some of them begin quietly, with a hand grabbed by accident and let go too fast, and they end, if you're patient enough, if you're brave enough, with that same hand finally choosing to stay.